We also learned more today about the FBI's secret files on Marilyn Monroe. They reveal some of her friends were suspected communists, and she once considered traveling to the Soviet Union. The FBI kept files on her from 1955 until her death in 1962.
Marilyn Monroe is Hollywood's golden girl, the icon, the enigma, the woman whose death has been picked apart, twisted, and romanticized for decades. And yet, after all that noise, nobody ever seemed to get real answers. Until now, it's all felt like a foggy puzzle with too many missing pieces, right? But what if I told you someone just found the piece that finally makes the whole thing click? In fact, it's downright chilling. Stick around, because by the end of this video, the myth they've been selling for 60 years, we're about to tear it to shreds. Let's go. Marilyn's early life and rise to fame. Behind all the glitz, glamour, and flashing camera lights that would one day define Marilyn Monroe's image, there lived a little girl named Norma Jean Mortensen, fragile, hopeful, and unknowingly destined for fame far greater than she could have imagined. She was born on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles, California, to a mother who was as troubled as she was loving. Her name was Gladys Pearl Baker, a woman plagued by severe mental illness that made parenting nearly impossible. From the very beginning, Norma Jean's life seemed to teeter on shaky ground. How could a child feel safe when the person meant to protect her was barely holding on herself? People often see stars like Marilyn Monroe and assume they were born lucky, right? That they simply walked into the spotlight and stayed there effortlessly. But if they looked closer, they'd see the cracks behind the sparkle. Norma Jean's early years were anything but stable. With her mother in and out of psychiatric hospitals, she was bounced from one foster home to another, even spending time in an orphanage. And sadly, as if that weren't enough, she was reportedly sexually abused during these formative years, wounds that wouldn't heal easily, if ever. Can anyone really blame her for longing so desperately for love, for safety, for a place to belong? They said she died alone. But what if she didn't? New details just came to light, and they're painting a picture no one expected. The mystery of Marilyn Monroe might finally be solved, but it's not the happy ending we hoped for. Don't blink, it gets worse. At just 16 years old, she got married. Not out of romance or youthful passion, but because she needed a way out. It was survival. Marrying her neighbor, James Dougherty, was less about starting a life and more about escaping the one she had. No one could have predicted that this quiet, brown-haired teenager would one day become the world's most iconic blonde bombshell. So how exactly did Norma Jean become Marilyn Monroe? The transformation didn't happen overnight, of course. It was gradual and deliberate. When she first entered the modeling world, people were instantly drawn to her photogenic face, her expressive eyes, and that shy yet charming smile. She had something special, undeniably so. That something led to a contract with 20th Century Fox in 1946. Her early film roles were small, but the studio saw her potential. And slowly, they began to reshape her into someone the world would remember forever. They dyed her hair platinum blonde, encouraged her to adopt that now famous breathy voice, and trained her in how to walk, talk, and even laugh in a way that fit the Marilyn Monroe mold. And just like that, the real girl, Norma Jean, began to disappear behind the persona they built for her. But was it all an act? Not quite. Marilyn herself helped craft this version of her identity. She leaned into the reinvention because it offered her something she'd never had before: control, admiration, and a sense of self-worth. Still, deep down, the tension between who she really was and who the world expected her to be would follow her for the rest of her life. Isn't it heartbreaking when a person becomes a stranger to themselves just to be loved? Though initially seen as little more than a pretty face, Marilyn wasn't content with just being the dumb blonde stereotype. She pushed against the typecasting, determined to prove that she was more than the sexy image plastered on posters and magazine covers. That's why she enrolled in the Actors Studio in New York. She studied under legendary teacher Lee Strasberg, sat beside serious actors, and poured herself into dramatic roles that required more than just beauty. They demanded vulnerability, depth, and soul. And she gave all of that, often drawing from her own well of trauma and pain to deliver performances that left people stunned. Who would have thought the girl once abandoned in foster care would later mesmerize audiences with such raw emotion? Still, for all the success and fame, Marilyn's life remained a balancing act between triumph and torment. She was beloved by millions, yet often felt profoundly alone. Her past, riddled with instability and abuse, never truly let go of her. And even as she stood in front of cameras, smiling for the world, the little girl inside her, the one who never really felt safe, who never felt fully loved, was still there, whispering quietly beneath the surface. The contrast between Norma Jean and Marilyn Monroe wasn't just about appearance. It was about identity, about survival, about becoming who the world needed her to be in order to be accepted. But in doing so, she lost pieces of herself. That's the tragedy wrapped inside the beauty of her story. She was both dazzling and deeply wounded, radiant and raw, adored and often misunderstood. People still ask today, was Marilyn Monroe ever truly happy? Maybe the real question is, did she ever get the chance to just be Norma Jean again? The men in her life and their influence. Marilyn Monroe's love life has long fascinated the world, not just because she dated some of the most powerful men of her time, but because each relationship seemed to mirror a different part of her, her dreams, her vulnerabilities, her longing for stability, and even her pain. It was almost as if every man she loved reflected back to her a version of herself that she was either chasing or trying to escape. People close to her said she wasn't just looking for romance. She was searching for someone to see the real her, beyond the spotlight, behind the beauty, past the fame. Was it love she wanted? Or was she just hoping someone might finally accept her for who she truly was? Take Joe DiMaggio, for instance. When Monroe and the famous baseball player began dating in 1952, it seemed like the classic American love story, Hollywood's golden girl and baseball's greatest hero. DiMaggio had reportedly asked to meet her, picturing her as the ideal mix of glamour and domesticity, someone who could light up a room and still be a nurturing wife and future mother. But Monroe quickly discovered he was far more reserved than she'd expected. She'd told friends she thought he'd be more of the bold, loud New Yorker type, but instead, he was quiet, guarded even. They married in a modest ceremony at San Francisco City Hall on January 14, 1954. The world swooned, but their honeymoon phase didn't last long. As Monroe's star continued to rise, DiMaggio reportedly grew more uncomfortable with her fame. He wanted her at home, not in front of flashing cameras and screaming fans. The turning point came during the filming of The 7-Year Itch. That famous scene, Marilyn standing over a subway grate as her white dress billowed upward, might have thrilled audiences, but for DiMaggio, it was humiliating. That moment, some said, was the last straw. Monroe filed for divorce just 9 months after the wedding, citing mental cruelty. And yet, the story didn't end there. Despite the divorce, their connection lingered. DiMaggio quietly stood by her during her lowest moments. He arranged her release from a psychiatric clinic, planned her funeral, and in what became a touching ritual, had red roses delivered to her grave 3 times a week for 2 full decades. What does that say about the depth of his feelings? Or perhaps the guilt he carried? Then there was Arthur Miller, the celebrated playwright, the intellectual, so different from the sports legend that came before him. With Miller, Monroe seemed to be chasing something else entirely, a deeper kind of love, one rooted not just in passion, but in understanding and acceptance. They married on June 29, 1956, with Monroe even converting to Judaism beforehand. The press mocked their pairing, calling it "Egghead Weds Hourglass." But Monroe believed she had finally found real love. She told people this was the first time she felt truly in love, as if she'd found someone who could finally see the thoughtful, curious woman behind the Hollywood mask. But real life didn't quite match the fantasy. Things began to unravel when Monroe came across Miller's private notes, in which he had written that he was disappointed in her. That revelation crushed her. How does someone recover from realizing the person they admire most might not feel the same way about them? On top of that emotional blow, Monroe suffered through multiple miscarriages, each one leaving her more fragile, more wounded. Their relationship never fully recovered. They divorced in January 1961, just before The Misfits, Miller's final gift to her, premiered. Was she chasing his approval until the very end? And then, of course, there were the Kennedys. The rumored affairs with both John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert remain some of the most hotly debated aspects of Monroe's life. Her breathy, unforgettable, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance in May 1962 raised eyebrows across the nation. It wasn't just the dress or the flirtatious tone, it was the unspoken tension. By then, whispers had already begun circulating about her involvement with the president, and some insiders even claimed she'd also had relations with Bobby Kennedy. According to biographer James Spada, it was pretty clear that Monroe had slept with both Kennedy brothers. If that's true, then one has to wonder, was she really in love? Or did she believe that being close to such powerful men might finally fill that void inside her? Some sources claimed she threatened to reveal the affairs, perhaps hoping to claim a sliver of truth in a life filled with so many secrets. Joe DiMaggio, despite everything, reportedly never forgave Frank Sinatra for introducing Marilyn to the Kennedy circle, suggesting that he believed those relationships were ultimately her downfall. Looking back, Marilyn Monroe's relationships were never just love stories. They were reflections of her inner turmoil, her desire to be seen, heard, and cherished. Each man offered her something she wanted: security, status, intellect, or simply affection, but none could give her everything she needed. And maybe that was the tragedy of it all. How could anyone truly love her when she was still figuring out how to love herself? Was she doomed to keep searching for a kind of love that didn't exist in the world she lived in? In the end, Monroe's lovers became chapters in the book of her life, each one shaping her in different ways, each one leaving behind memories that the public still sifts through, trying to understand the real Marilyn. But maybe that's what she was all along. A mystery too vast for any one person to solve. A woman who belonged not just to herself or her lovers, but to an entire world that wanted to see her shine, even as she quietly faded behind the scenes. Which brings us to the part no one can look away from. The part that still breaks hearts and fuels rumors. Her final days. What really happened? Stick with us, because this next chapter isn't just important. It might change the way you see everything that came before. The final days, what really happened? The official story surrounding Marilyn Monroe's final hours has long been accepted by the public as tragic but straightforward. A troubled starlet found dead in her bed from an apparent overdose. But as the years have passed, and more people have stepped forward with new details, and as old testimonies continue to unravel under scrutiny, it's become increasingly clear that the truth may be far murkier, even sinister. Many now wonder, was Marilyn's death really what they told us it was? Or is the real story hidden beneath a tangled web of inconsistencies, strange timelines, and suspicious silences? On the surface, August 4th, 1962, was supposed to have been just another day at Marilyn's Brentwood home. Nothing about it appeared unusual until, reportedly, the early hours of the next morning. According to the official record, her housekeeper Eunice Murray discovered Marilyn's lifeless body at 3:30 a.m. on August 5th. She said she had noticed something was wrong, called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who then came and broke through a window to reach her bedroom. Soon after, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, Monroe's personal physician, arrived at 3:50 a.m. But curiously, despite what appeared to be an urgent situation, the police weren't contacted until 4:25 a.m., a full 35 minutes later. Why the delay? What happened in those missing minutes? And if that wasn't already suspicious, several neighbors later claimed they had seen an ambulance parked outside Marilyn's home much earlier that night, around 10 p.m. That's not a minor discrepancy. That's a 5-hour difference that completely unravels the timeline. Even stranger, Eunice Murray reportedly first told the police she had grown concerned about Marilyn around midnight. But for the official version, she changed her account to 3:30 a.m. Why change her story? Was she trying to hide something, or was she told to? The inconsistencies don't stop there. Both Murray and Dr. Greenson, two of the people closest to Marilyn in those final hours, gave statements that contradicted not only each other, but sometimes even their own earlier words. In later taped conversations, Murray admitted something that had long been whispered in conspiracy circles. Robert Kennedy had, in fact, visited Marilyn at her home that very afternoon. According to her, it wasn't a friendly visit. It involved a terrible argument. That alone casts a heavy shadow over the hours that followed, especially considering the rumored tensions between Monroe and the Kennedy family at the time. Were they trying to silence her? Was she becoming a liability? And then there's the haunting claim from writer John Sherlock, who insisted that Dr. Greenson had confessed a bombshell detail to him. Monroe didn't actually die in her home. According to that version, she passed away in an ambulance en route to the hospital. And then, shockingly, her body was brought back and staged to make it appear as though she had died peacefully in her bedroom. Could such an elaborate cover-up have really taken place without raising more questions back then? Or did it raise them, only for those questions to be buried alongside Marilyn herself? The strange pieces of this puzzle don't end with timelines and testimonies. One item, in particular, has become the holy grail of Monroe mystery hunters: the so-called Red Diary. Allegedly, this small red book contained intimate details about Marilyn's relationships with both John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, potentially even state secrets they had let slip in moments of carelessness. Former coroner's investigator Lionel Grandison came forward years later claiming he had seen the diary with his own eyes. But he also claimed something even more alarming: that he was pressured into signing Monroe's death certificate, and that the Red Diary vanished from evidence without explanation. If this diary was so important, who wanted it gone? And more importantly, why? There's also the matter of surveillance. For decades, it had been speculated that Marilyn's home, and even her bedroom, had been bugged. It was the sort of theory many laughed off at the time. But then came a quiet confirmation from Fred Otash, a private investigator who plainly stated that yes, her room had been bugged. No hesitation, no winks, just a matter-of-fact declaration. If Monroe was under that kind of surveillance, who was listening? The government? The mob? Or someone else entirely? Taken together, all these bits and pieces, these shadowy moments, contradicting accounts, and missing items, form a picture that no longer fits the neatly framed official story. It makes you ask, was Marilyn Monroe's death just the tragic end of a troubled life? Or was it the silencing of a woman who knew too much and spoke too freely? Her charm and vulnerability made her America's sweetheart, but perhaps it also made her dangerous to the powerful men she kept company with. And in the end, could that have been her undoing? As more documents surface, more voices speak out, and more researchers dig deeper, the cracks in the original story widen. The more we look, the more we realize that the mystery of Marilyn Monroe isn't just a question of how she died, but of who decided that we should never know the real answer. Was she alive during the ambulance ride? According to reports, Walt Schaefer, who owned an ambulance company at the time, shared a shocking account that challenges everything the public thought they knew about Marilyn Monroe's final moments. He confirmed that Monroe was rushed to the hospital on a Friday evening, but she was already barely alive by the time they got to her. Now, that might seem like just another tragic detail in a celebrity death. But here's the kicker. This version of events completely contradicts the official timeline that has been upheld for decades. Think about that for a moment. How can such a major detail, like the time she was found and her condition, be so wildly different from the official report? That's not a minor discrepancy. That's a red flag the size of California. Schaefer's account suggests that something or someone intervened before her death went public. Reports claim that there were sudden, almost frantic efforts to erase any trace of the Kennedy brothers' involvement in Monroe's life before her death was made official. It's as if someone hit the panic button behind the scenes, scrambling to clean up connections that could point fingers in powerful directions. Isn't it strange how much effort was allegedly put into damage control before the world even knew she was gone? Fast forward 20 years to 1982. After 2 decades of swirling rumors, whispers in corridors, and relentless media speculation, Los Angeles District Attorney John Van de Kamp felt the pressure. And eventually, he gave in to it. He reopened the Monroe case, not necessarily because the authorities wanted to, but because the public wouldn't let it rest. They wanted answers. Was it really self-harm? Was it an accidental overdose? Or was it something more sinister? After a 3-month review, Van de Kamp's office concluded that Monroe had died either by self-harm or by accident. On paper, it looked like the case was finally closed again. But here's the problem. This reinvestigation, though commendable in theory, didn't really touch the deepest cracks in the story. It was like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that had never healed. Many questions were left unanswered, and, perhaps most disturbingly, the review failed to explain why critical pieces of evidence had gone missing. Isn't that odd? For a case this high profile, wouldn't you expect investigators to be laser-focused on every detail? Deputy District Attorney Ronald Carroll even admitted that there were 2 particularly troubling areas in the case that couldn't be ignored. The first was the murky source of Monroe's medication. Where did all those pills come from, really? Were they prescribed properly? Or were they handed out behind closed doors by people with too much power and too little accountability? And the second issue? The baffling delay in notifying the police. In situations involving a celebrity, especially one as iconic as Marilyn, wouldn't you expect authorities to be called the minute something seemed wrong? But in this case, there was an unexplained lag that raises more questions than answers. Why the delay? Who waited? And what were they waiting for? Put all of that together, and you start to see a picture that doesn't quite fit the official frame. From the ambulance driver's chilling first-hand account, to the erased traces of powerful men, to the shallow reinvestigation that avoided the deepest truths, it's hard not to feel like we're only scratching the surface of what really happened that night. Is it possible that Monroe's tragic end was more than a personal crisis? That it was, in fact, the fallout of something much bigger, something carefully hidden? The truth, it seems, continues to lie just beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough, or perhaps powerful enough, to dig it out. Until then, all the world can do is keep asking questions, because the story, as it stands, simply doesn't add up. So as we dig deeper into this mystery, don't look away. In fact, stay with us till the very end, because what we're about to uncover may finally shed light on the truth the world was never meant to see. And once you see it, you won't forget it. The Marilyn Monroe mystery finally solved, and it's not good. For decades, questions have swirled around the tragic death of Marilyn Monroe, and while the official story says she died by self-harm through an overdose of barbiturates, a growing body of evidence and investigation tells a far more unsettling tale. Anthony Summers, an investigative journalist who spent years digging into Monroe's life and final hours for his book Goddess, came to a sobering conclusion. While the cause may have been an accidental overdose, it was not as simple or as innocent as it appeared. According to Summers, Monroe's death was not just a private tragedy, but a carefully managed cover-up, shrouded in silence by those who had powerful reasons to keep the full truth buried. Why would anyone go to such lengths if her death was truly just a case of taking too many pills? Summers' research brought to light something that earlier investigations had either missed or ignored entirely: audio evidence. One striking revelation came from John Miner, a former Los Angeles prosecutor, who had access to Monroe's confidential therapy recordings. According to Miner, the tapes painted a portrait of a woman who, contrary to the official story, was not self-harm at all. In fact, she sounded optimistic and full of plans for the future. Miner insisted she was in no mental state to end her own life. But here's where things get even more suspicious. Those tapes, which could have provided critical insight into her state of mind, mysteriously vanished after her death. Coincidence? Or a deliberate act to erase evidence that contradicted the accepted narrative? And then there's the physical evidence, which, frankly, just doesn't sit right. One might assume that someone who had supposedly ingested 40 or more pills would have done so with the help of water. Yet when investigators arrived, there was no glass anywhere near Monroe's body. Isn't that strange? Even more puzzling, the toxicology report didn't show any pill residue in her stomach, which seems impossible if she had swallowed that many capsules shortly before dying. Instead, the autopsy revealed highly concentrated levels of harmful substances in her liver, not in her bloodstream, suggesting the harmful substances entered her system slowly, likely through injection rather than ingestion. Why would someone inject harmful substances into themselves instead of just taking a few pills? And if someone else administered them, then who? Adding to the mystery, important phone records from the night of Monroe's death also disappeared, including logs that might have revealed who she spoke to in her final hours. These were not just minor oversights. They were key pieces of the puzzle that vanished at a time when they were needed most. How could so many crucial details conveniently go missing all at once? It's hard not to feel like someone, somewhere, was pulling strings to steer the narrative in a particular direction. Over the years, society has largely accepted the idea that Monroe was just another tragic Hollywood figure, beautiful, broken, and undone by fame. But is that the full story? Or have we all been too willing to believe a version of events that lets powerful people off the hook? Framing Monroe's death as a simple self-harm allows those who may have played a role in her final hours to remain untouchable. It's a pattern we've seen before, when influential men are shielded from scrutiny, while vulnerable women are written off as unstable or emotionally fragile. Isn't it time we questioned why we keep repeating this cycle? More recent revelations have only deepened the doubt around the official story. Previously unheard tapes and new witness testimonies have come to light, shifting the public's perception of what really happened. One such voice is that of former DEA officer James Hall, who bluntly claimed that Bobby Kennedy was there on the night Monroe died. That's a direct contradiction of official denials, and if that weren't enough, surveillance expert Fred Otash confirmed that Monroe's house had been bugged, and that she knew about it. Imagine knowing that your most private moments were being listened to. She reportedly felt angry and violated by this intrusion, and it's hard not to wonder who was listening and why. All of this has gradually chipped away at the notion of Monroe's death being a clear-cut case of self-destruction. What if she was silenced, not by her own hands, but by the forces around her? What if her relationships with high-ranking political figures made her a liability? Summer's work, and the emerging testimonies from people once silenced or ignored, suggest Monroe's end may have been part of a calculated operation, one designed to protect reputations, careers, and secrets that would have been explosive if exposed. In the end, the tragedy of Marilyn Monroe isn't just that she died young and alone, but that her story has been manipulated, muffled, and misrepresented for so long. Instead of being remembered as a woman who fought for control over her life, she was portrayed as a fragile starlet who simply couldn't cope. That's not only unfair, it's a disservice to the truth. And the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that the truth was never just about pills or fame or loneliness. It was about power, secrecy, and the lengths people will go to in order to protect both. Isn't it time we stopped accepting the easy answers and started demanding the real ones? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.